Hello, this is a video lecture on the Beyond the Classroom study plan. The study plan begins with some discussion of why it's so important to maintain good communication with an instructor. As the title of the study plan would lead you to believe, this interaction goes on beyond the classroom. It's not simply being there and raising your hand from time to time. Instead, this is maintaining good lines of communication with an instructor through things like emails, office hours, and other chances we might have to be able to talk with that person about the material of the course without just being in the classroom when that happens. One of the first and most important benefits of good communication with an instructor is the fact that we get to know the college and college culture even better. This helps the student to be more comfortable where they are. It helps to have an understanding of expectations for things like missed classes. And finally, it helps to make sure we remember that the instructor themselves is a representative of that college and of the college culture. The better we understand the instructor, the better we understand the college that the instructor stands for. This can also be very helpful in making sure that the student stays in college. Such interaction with an instructor can help with grades so you're not hating college or struggling too much, and it can also help with motivation through that personal connection that you form. Interaction with an instructor can lead to recommendations. That is, performing well in a course can lead to recommendations for different schools or jobs. And finally, further interaction with an instructor can be a great way to begin networking. This could help us to be introduced to someone who could benefit us in the long term. And this could also help us with access to different resources, such as people, financial resources, and again, jobs in other schools. There are some important guidelines to bear in mind, though, when we interact with an instructor. First and foremost, we want to be prepared, to have a clear question to ask, make sure that you're not wasting their time or yours. Introduce yourself to the instructor. That person probably knows that you are someone from a class, but they may not remember your name. Introductions can also help to overcome the difference in context. Generally, these introductions are chances to get to know each other just well enough to make the entire interaction a little bit smoother. Respect the instructor's time. Ultimately, an instructor who is trying hard to help a student but who feels like their time isn't being used efficiently will eventually become irritated, and at that point, no one really benefits. Showing that respect is a big part of a good instructor relationship and a good instructor interaction every time it happens. Understand that the instructor will recognize you from class. They'll recognize you by face, but they will also recognize you by your habits and based on the work that you've submitted. Generally speaking, again, even if an instructor doesn't remember your name, they've probably got some recollection of things that you do in class. Maybe they caught you texting on your phone. Maybe they woke you up when you fell asleep. And they probably have a good working memory of whatever academic work you either have or haven't submitted. If you go in to talk to an instructor, don't be surprised if they ask you about the essay that you forgot to submit a month ago. Now, as tempting as it might be to try to fool or mislead an instructor about work that you've either done or not done or mean to do, it's just not worth it. Generally, the instructor is going to have a pretty good idea of whether what you're saying is accurate. The other thing to make sure you realize is that instructors have been through this before. The instructor has had those interactions, they've talked with students, and frankly, the instructor has probably been fooled before and learned from that. All these things are all reasons to make sure that we don't make that mistake of trying to fool them again. Make sure that you're trying to see things from the instructor's point of view. If you ask for an extension or other consideration and they say no, make sure that you can see why. Again, try to see things from their point of view. You also need to make sure that you remember that the instructor will try to help you, but you are one of a number of students. Generally speaking, you're probably one in about 100 or maybe even 125 students. As much as your instructor would like to give you every single thing you ask for, oftentimes they can't out of the practical considerations of all the students they have. Finally, make sure that you're being professional when talking to your instructor. Perform your adulthood and respect and maturity. Remember that the professor still holds authority. And the person that you know in the classroom is very likely a persona that might not be the exact same thing as the instructor themselves. Remember from time to time that the instructor has chosen to show the class a certain side of themselves that probably isn't the entire thing, and respect that. Now, it's more likely that most of your outside of classroom interactions with your instructors will happen via email. There are some important to dos and not to dos to remember here. First and foremost, if you're going to write an email to a professor and you're upset, try to maybe not write the email right then, or at least try to be aware of the things that you're saying because of the fact that you're upset. As a student once said to me, if you're upset, you can write the email, but try very hard not to be an asshole. Say what you mean, but make sure to say it in terms that are as neutral as possible. Rampaging gets you nowhere. An email that just flames the instructor is one that the instructor is very quickly going to delete. Ultimately, try to make sure that you can recommend a solution to the problem instead of just focusing on the solution and complaining about that. Unfortunately, the complaint email is one that doesn't really get you anywhere. Now, there are circumstances where a conflict might arise with a professor, and this is tough. This is probably the most difficult thing that any student would need to deal with. First and foremost, if you do go to talk to that instructor and the person you're talking to just isn't interested in raising the grade, you want to start by explaining your needs. Sometimes it's possible that the instructor doesn't realize that there are good reasons that you need to be able to raise the grade somehow. Well, a professor can't always give you a chance to redo work for more credit. It can still help to explain why it is that we either think we should have gotten the higher grade or we need it. This doesn't make the professor responsible for your grades, but it does help them understand your motives, both short and long term. If you will need to work with the professor on a regular basis to get the grades use this situation as a chance to make plans for that. Include that person in the process, but like I said, don't make that professor responsible for your grades. They are yours. When you're interacting with instructors overall, it always makes sense to consider the long term. Number one, this is because interactions that you have with your instructors could lead to the most meaningful experiences you have in your college career. Think as though this will happen so that you're always ready for it. Don't write an instructor off if you can help it. Keeping a good relation with an instructor in the long term will always come in handy because there will always come that moment you need a favor, even if you didn't think so. At the same time, don't make assumptions about what the instructor is prepared to do for you. Go to them asking for help, but don't make a specific request. It's up to them to decide what they're willing to do for you for help. Lastly, consider the need to go the extra mile. There is such a thing as asking for too much, though, so there's always a balance to be struck. You can ask for extensions, but don't just take them. You can ask for help, but don't assume that you can just figure things out on your own. You can ask for time to deal with complications from the rest of life, but this means keeping your instructor in the loop. You can ask the instructor for guidance if you're considering or pursuing a degree or specialization in the subject area. Overall, though, don't ever assume what response you'll get. You need to make sure that you leave the situation open to the response that the instructor is willing to give you. This is the end of the video discussion of part 1 of the study plan.